Good morning, everybody. So we have heard a lot of I4MS so far, and you heard the term all the time. So I thought it's maybe time to explain a bit in more detail what it is and how we do it, because we are a bit fishing in the dark. We are on the top, so I plan to go a bit into some details about it. As we have people here in the audience who don't know I4MS, maybe some data. We run since a year, Kathy has told you, 1 year, it's about 1 year now. It's 7 large projects, each of them having many experiments across the value chain. It's 77 million euros funding from the European Union, which means around 110 million or so, you cannot exactly say cost. We have 70% industrial participation, that we also extrapolate with taking into account that some of the activities are not yet defined. In total, 50% in terms of partners, 40% of funding goes to SMEs and mid-caps, Mittelstand. So it's quite a lot of budget going for them, and we cover broadly Europe in, as far as I understand at the moment, 25 countries. But we are still working on it, so we'll see how far we get. 2/3 of the organizations we have involved in this initiative are newcomers to the program. So it goes really to the outside. Now, I start with something simple that you all know, but I thought to say who we target, it's best to put something simple on that is familiar. We know value chains are not linear anymore. It's value constellations and all kinds of terms that are used for that. But to explain what we want to do, we want to connect innovators with these kind of schemes across value chain to support adoption of technologies which we believe can help. So that's a technology push way of describing it. So we want to help companies to cross the chasm or to cross the valley of death that also Khalil has shown with the bridge in one of the last last slides. We all know that from a prototype that comes out of the labs to making something a product, to provide a service, there's a cost of at least 10 times as much or more. So we want to help, and I think that's now the important point, we want to help technology suppliers in making their product ready, in giving them use cases to demonstrate what they can do with these products. So that's for the supply side, and we want to help users, new users, to profit from emerging technologies, be the first ones, and capitalize on that through early adoptions, gaining competitiveness through that. So that is the aim, the overall aim of the initiative. It's a bottom-up initiative, and when you look at the landscape of 21 million SMEs in Europe, we look really at with these initiatives, we look at the high end. The high end is the inner circles there, 21 million in total. When you look at the inner circle, it's maximum 200, 250,000 or even less. And when I say high end, it's the high end ICT SMEs, the suppliers of ICT technologies in applications. It's the integrators on the supply side, but it's also the high end, so that are the two red ellipse there. It's also the high-end advanced ICT users. So we are not targeting the pizza store to use Microsoft whatever. We are targeting here really the use of advanced ICT. And the way we help SMEs is along 3 dimensions, and that distinguishes initiatives like I4MS from others. We want to support SMEs. We want to give them financial support. But that's not all, because with financial support, they would not get expertise, they would not get access to technologies and to knowledge. So we have the vertical axis, which is technology and access to technology and competence transfer from suppliers, users, and from competence centers. And last but not least important is also to network them, and not just in their regional ecosystem, but to help network them across Europe, and if they cannot do it alone, with the help of the competence centers who know the European landscape. So that's what we are aiming at, that's our target. So let me introduce the new schemes, and I start with a slide that Khalil has already put, the characteristics of the new innovation schemes in Horizon 2020. which we are piloting with initiatives like ECHORD or I4MS, the goal is to connect innovators across the value chain, to cross the valley of death, and we need for that a critical mass, so a large number of experiments where we show what you can do with these technologies so others can also learn from that through disseminating the lessons learned. We target particularly SMEs and I'm in Berlin here, so I say Mittelstand. And on the supply and demand side, on both sides, there are some initiatives within I4MS which are more supply side oriented, like the ones on laser and sensor technologies. There are some who are more demand side oriented, like the ones on simulation and robotics, but both in a way touch both sides. Yeah, but there's a certain focus on them. We cluster them, and Khalil has identified that already as that the competence centers, technology transfer centers, application centers, technology centers, you name it, what you need to make it work. These technology centers are in the middle, and they are at the center of it, and they are networked in order to bring all competences together so that SMEs in your regions can profit not from their only competence center that they are linked to, but profit from the knowledge of all of them. Okay, that's something that has to be made work because it's a complex setup, and I explained a bit more. We have started it in FP7, so I4MS 1 year ago, ECHORD is already in robotics, is running since some time before. We now want to broadly applying it in Horizon 2020 in other areas. We are just evaluating right now a call on Smart Anything Everywhere, where we try to boost take-up of embedded ICT and cyber-physical systems technologies in non-traditional sectors, like what we call the low-tech sectors that do not use ICT very much yet, and in the newly emerging sectors like the smart city, smart home, and so on. And with this, we try to push it. Also, in 2015, so opening in summer this year or in autumn this year, we have another one that is on the adoption of low-cost, low-energy microserver computing technologies designed and to a large extent made in Europe to be adopted in embedded and cyber-physical systems. Now, in these initiatives, we usually target on the fast adoption of a strategic selection of ICT technologies, which we believe have a particularly high impact on these sectors. And here I've picked the ones that Khalil has mentioned that we consider crucial in modernizing Europe's manufacturing sector. And I take some words from Mr. Tettenborn from yesterday. He basically said our role is to keep production in Europe, to reinforce production in Europe, and, if possible, to bring back production in Europe. And this is what we are trying to advocate by. We can only do it in Europe if we produce highly innovative, high-quality products at competitive prices. And the ICT is contributing to all three of them. Sorry. Now, what I would like to highlight here when I show these technologies, you haven't heard the word big data yet or IoT. I think in buzzwords like cyber-physical system needs big data, and cyber-physical systems is also built on top of the IoT. So implicitly, like modeling, simulation, analytics already says big data is part of that. So I'm not mentioning them explicitly, but they are implicitly behind these words. Now, I want you throughout this event to remember this Marguerite picture. I once got it from Gérard Rouquayrol, who is one of the leading French ICT experts, former CEO of Bull, and a leading innovator in France. And he told me, why don't you depict it as a Marguerite? These kind of initiatives. So in the middle we have the red bullets that are the competence centers. They are networked, and they can be very technology oriented, but they can as well be application oriented. So you see them from infrastructure and access to it, electronic systems, cloud, HPC centers, up to application centers who are experts in technologies being used in applications. So there's a critical role of the pan-European network of competence centers. In the next session, Sylvie will interview some of the experts there, and she will give you a bit more insight. They will give you a bit more insight on that. Let me just tell you, they are providing expertise skills. They are brokers, facilitators across value chains, across regions, across sectors, and they support technology transfer and act as multipliers. Last not least, they also manage the whole thing. They are the interface to us, and they make sure that the SMEs do not have to deal that much with the bureaucracy of the European programs. So they support a critical mass of experiments which are industrial, which usually have full value chains from several levels of suppliers to users, and which share the lessons learned. Sharing lessons learned doesn't mean sharing IPRs. It's just lessons learned on these activities, and I think that's quite important. I would like you to remember this Marguerite, and I come back to it in a second. One example that I would like to depict here is HPC cloud-based simulation services for SMEs. It's a typical example of how an experiment is structured. You have a first-time user, an SME first-time user, who would like to have one-stop shopping access to simulation services, including everything they need, expertise, compute resources, everything. So we link them together with the innovation centers, with application experts, and bring them together with software suppliers. So the software suppliers of simulation codes in this program want to also introduce innovation. They want to play with the cloud. They want to use cloud-based business models, but they don't want to expose the whole community to it because they fear that they lose revenue through that. So this is a controlled environment where they can use these new programming models and try their software in the cloud. And last not least, we bring HPC resource providers in who want to provide in the long term sustainable services on that, and not just academic centers providing services for doing research, because as soon as research is over and when SMEs want to do production runs, then they have a problem. We allow these experiments to have flexible partnerships, so if an SME wants to bring their traditional service provider or their large industry they work with, they can bring them into these experiments, because we want to limit make them deviate as little as necessary from their comfort zone in these projects. Now, we bring this together. We have 7, in I4MS we have 7 of these. We bring several of these projects together and have an innovation multiplier who helps them to exploit synergies, to link to innovation networks across Europe, like the Enterprise Europe network, or into member states, to provide services to projects like the web portal, corporate identity, and so on, but could much go beyond that, like, for example, working on business models. They do dissemination and brokerage events, and if I now show that with I4MS, you see that we have 7 of these in I4MS: robotics, HPC, cloud-based simulation services, lasers and sensors, and the data I've already given. So you see that we have 3 on lasers and sensors, 3 on simulation for SMEs, and 1 large one on robotics, and the glue between all of them is I4MS GATE. That's our innovation multiplier projects that is there to help them and to exploit synergies as an innovation measure as such. You can imagine, like, when there are technologies adopted in the automotive sectors from any of these 3 areas, it doesn't make sense that they individually go to an automotive fair. They can join forces to bring innovation into these sectors, and that's the role of I4MS GATE to support. Now, my final part is giving some framework and refining a bit what Khalil has said, and at the same time then in my closing asking some questions that we could address during the meeting today. So how do we better exploit the national and regional dimension in future? I mean, this is a top-down Commission approach that we have at the moment, linking to the competence centers, but we would like to hook the competence centers more in national ecosystems. The centers we have involved, like I use a German example because we're in Berlin here, the Fraunhofers that we have, the Fraunhofer Institutes. We have 3 or 4 Fraunhofer Institutes in this, or maybe even 5. How can we better link that into the local? How can we better link that to Industrie 4.0? How can we link it to Catapult or to initiative in the other regions that we will have later? Now, one answer to that is we can do that through the smart specialization initiatives and through pooling resources through the structural funds. Now, everybody talks about it, and it's a bit in everybody's mind at the moment. What I would like to see is whether we can make it work. So make it work in one of the next calls. So the idea that I would like to put on the table here is to consider launching kind of satellite projects. We continue with I4MS as European project, but we try to complement it with centers in less developed regions that get access to technologies and competences, or centers from highly developed regions who can export their competences. And we could fund such satellite projects that are complementary to I4MS bottom up in regions. I mean, I could see roles of these projects. We have experiments on European level, but doing feasibility studies with local industry, how can they adopt it? Doing best practice experiments, which are maybe a bit less innovative because they replicate what we do on European level, but in these regions that would bring a lot of, in less development, would bring a lot of innovation, so best practice experiments, local dissemination, skills development, or support local infrastructures to support these kind of technologies. So this is a bit the ideas that I would bring up for discussion, and I would like to conclude with some remarks now. Just to repeat, we are applying this across Horizon 2020 in the Smart Anything Everywhere initiative, which is on networks of embedded systems design centers. We are currently evaluating them this week in parallel in Brussels. Network of computing application centers, that's on the low-cost, low-power microserver ecosystem that we have in Europe, made in Europe, designed in Europe, and the I4MS Phase 2. In total, we in 14-15, we see around 80 million euros going on that from the public side. And the issues that we see to be addressed in future, and which we are happy to discuss with you further today, is how do we support, could we support with these kind of initiatives also pan-European platform building? For example, there is a design of a platform. How do we bring platforms to broad adoption? That would be one way that is quite interesting to support with such initiatives, so to be a bit more focused on one or the other project. How to better root I4MS-like initiatives in national and regional ecosystems. How to more systematically reach the target audience. Yeah, at the moment we have the centers in their regions, they know who they have to reach, but in other regions we may not know that. How do we do that more systematically? Is there a need for demonstration centers at program level where we demonstrate what we have done? Some of the competence centers do that already. Maybe we have to put more emphasis on that. It's a question mark. How do we link to smart specialization in less developed regions? Again, an example, simple example, take an area that we are all familiar with, automotive, very easy. In Stuttgart, in München, in some areas, in Italy, in France, there are all the competences, but there are also regions like around Győr in Hungary or in Romania where they produce Dacia, where we could see that certain technologies are adopted as well, and I think this is worthwhile looking at. Also, there are other sectors, textile also, where these kind of technologies could be used. How do we address the skills gap? I mean, we should always be aware that when we do software, you need not be located in the region where your production is, because you could have virtual value chains. We have the network, we can connect. So we could get skills included in this work who live remotely in whatever region and can still work with us, can still contribute to value creation. And last not least, Khalil has mentioned it as well, how to provide access to finance for successful SMEs that come out of this initiative. So with these open questions, I would like to close this overview and hand it back to Kathy. Thank you very much.
Thank you.